Now, as promised, Sir Nigel is back in the studio to talk to our final guest of the day, Claire Melamed, the CEO of the Global Partnership for Sustainable Development Data. Claire joins us from her own organisation's conference, the Festival De Datos, or Data for Development Festival in Uruguay. Over to you, Nigel.
Thank you, Navdeep. And Claire, wonderful to have you as part of our summit. And indeed, you are joining us from Uruguay. So first of all, tell us a little bit about your summit, what it's achieved, and then we'll get back to what this summit's been all about and what we've achieved here today.
Thank you, Nigel, and buenos dias a todos from Uruguay. I'm speaking, we're kind of passing the baton here. This is the opening session. Obviously, we're a few hours behind you, so it's just lunchtime here in Uruguay. We've just finished the first morning of our big network gathering. The Global Partnership for Sustainable Development Data is a network of more than 700 organizations who all in different ways are working to use data and the technologies that are driven by data to achieve the UN's Sustainable Development Goals, to build that better world that we all hope at least is possible. And we have brought together as many of our partners as we could fit into the convention center to really spend 3 days together, a lot of learning going on. There's, in fact, a session going on right now on using AI for official statistics, which I've been told is standing room only. So very topical, learning together, hearing a little bit more about examples of what each other's doing, addressing some of the tricky issues, not shying away from some of the areas of disagreement and challenge, and understanding not just the technical issues around data, but the policy and the political issues and how we can bring those worlds of technical solutions together with the public policy environment that actually puts them to use. How can we improve communication between those two things? It's a very global audience. We've got people here from more than 90 countries. So we're set for a really exciting few days. And I know that you've also had really fantastic conversations today at the ODI Summit. So it's great to be joining the two.
Well, great to have you here. As I say, yeah, we've had a busy day, a very, very full and busy day with a huge amount of energy. Kicked off this morning with a conversation I had with Rebecca from McGovern and Irene from Policy, who we talked a little bit about the challenges that we're facing in an age of generative AI, and also in the context of the recently held Bletchley Declaration and the AI Summit. And I think what we've seen today is a really broad diversity of voices and diversity of contexts. What struck me very much was a recognition that, yes, there are existential risks around AI. Yes, we need to be aware of the issues that relate to safety, but a huge interest in recruiting this technology with appropriately high quality data to do good, for good. And I think we spoke about this a little bit last week around the fringes of the AI Summit. What's your sense of this whole dynamic between the dangers on the one hand and the good on the other, which was very much a feature of today's deliberation here in the summit?
Yeah, I mean, I think today, certainly the conversations that we've had so far are very much swinging more towards the optimistic. And I think we just had a panel here on AI, and there's a real sort of strong sense, I think, of the possibilities that are here. Somebody spoke from the World Health Organization talking about some of the benefits that AI is bringing to diagnostics, to even things like help the development of the COVID vaccine so fast and things like that. So I think there is here a real sense of optimism about it. And I think here, rather than worrying about too much AI and the dangers of that, a lot of people here are very focused on not enough AI and the issues, the people, the countries that are excluded from being able to either receive AI products that are created elsewhere or develop their own AI applications because their data sets are incomplete, because people are missing from data sets, because they lack the technical infrastructure or the skills to be able to participate fully in this new world of AI. So I think while on the one hand, there is, some people are worrying about too much AI, slowing it down, what are the risks? And those are absolute, things which also we're talking about here, but there's a very strong narrative here also of not enough AI.
Yeah.
And how can we make sure that we're opening up and democratizing the world of AI for everybody?
Well, that was very much a theme, I think, of today as well. I mean, Irene was pointing out that often in the African context, there's a whole range of local languages that, despite the promise of modern generative AI, are still not fully added to the range of languages that can be dealt with. I mean, that's one thing that I think is promising about this new strain of AI, that actually it seems to be very good at taking underrepresented languages and getting some level of appropriate conversational agent implemented. So that's definitely a feature we're looking out for inclusion. You talk about the quality of data sets. We had that very much in our second panel around designing net zero data for the built environment, where there's this huge challenge around embodied carbon, huge set of appetite for getting reporting mechanisms right, and yet the challenge is still in a data infrastructure that's fit for purpose. So I think that's a common theme we keep coming back to. And just on the point about exclusivity, Linda Bonio from the Lawyers Hub, who represents thousands of legal practitioners in Africa, was saying that they had huge problems in just getting people to their conference in Canada just through being unable to get people visas. I mean, there's just traditional standard bureaucratic impediments. With the best will in the world, we want to spread this information best practice around. We can't get people to the places they need to be to discuss the issues.
That's such a bit, we're a global network, and that issue about visas is huge for us. I mean, what I hope we're starting to see, let's see if we can all be part of that, is creating a little bit of a race to the top on visas. Certainly whenever we host an event, for this data festival, for the next data festival, which we will be announcing the host for at the end of the conference, one of the criteria that we apply to judging the different entries of, people who submit a proposal to host the festival is how easy are you going to make it for people to come? Are you going to sort out visas? So I hope that all of us who are involved in any sort of global event can start to create a race to the top and create incentives for the countries that want to be involved in global conversations, if they are serious about wanting to be involved in global conversations, wanting to exercise their convening power, which is power like any other. They have to make it possible for people to come.
So it's kind of ironic in the context of our virtually a summit where we've had the ability to kind of abolish the tyranny of geography. But of course, you just do need to get people together on occasion, absolutely get them together. And the bureaucracies need to be tamed. In an age of data, that ought to be possible. Of course, then we came on to our State of the Nation. Tim and I had a really great conversation with Charlotte around actually, again, the opportunities and possibilities for AI. We were talking very much about issues that pertain to regulation, the regulatory kind of landscape we're in, and the extent to which the worry is that the tech companies might be marking their own homework. How far do we go with regulation? Would this stifle innovation? This classic kind of balancing act we have. And Tim made the very good point that, of course, in lots of areas of potential application of practice, there's a ton of regulation. I mean, in the medical professions, in recruitment, in law, it's not as if there are no regulations at all. And we often reach to think we've got to invent brand new laws for a new application of technology, whereas we've got quite a lot of law and regulation. What's your sense when you look at existing versus the requirement for new regulation?
It does feel to me that, perhaps there's a conversation going on somewhere among experts on this, but I do feel that the sort of broad public policy conversation about regulation is quite diffuse and not very well defined yet. Because I think, for example, I'm not sure that we yet, perhaps speaking for the people at this conference at least, are in have the information that we need to fully answer Tim's question. When we talk about regulation in this quite general way, what harm or do we specifically want to regulate? What behavior do we want to incentivize? And as you say, what exists already, and where do we need brand new regulation? So I feel like the whole conversation about regulation needs to be a little bit, become more specific, become more focused, and particularly in the area of, what is it we're actually trying to achieve here? I think we want to apply regulation to achieve lots of different, and in some cases, slightly contradictory objectives. So not that you can't do that, of course, government and regulatory frameworks always all about trade-offs. But I think we're not quite there yet in kind of actually defining the problem in a way which then allows a more sort of general public debate about what the solutions might be.
One of the issues we also touched on was the emergence potentially of a class of generative models which are highly personalized to individuals. And of course, that brings you into the whole question of how individual and personal data will be blended into these models. Will we have guarantees that will secure privacy? How can you learn appropriate patterns to support individuals without pooling that data back into questions of privacy and security? And I think, though, we all think there's really interesting opportunities to produce highly personalized, whether it's legal, educational, health advice, and contextual support for individuals or groups using this technology. So again, another reason to be hopeful. We did actually do a number of surveys. One of the surveys was around this whole question of how did people feel about the actual prospects for success. And people, again, had a strong sense that there would be an impact in their lives, but weren't entirely sanguine about the whole question of data ethics, whether we really had thought about how to deploy this data in a safe and trustworthy fashion. So a key issue through the day was the quality of data. How do we evidence its provenance, where it comes from? There's been a lot of talk in the summit, but also at in the Biden executive directive around watermarking, or some notion of the origination of machine-generated content. And I think that's going to be something that we'll need to think about whenever we apply it, not least in the Sustainable Development Goals.
Absolutely. No, I mean, there's so many fascinating aspects to that, but I think at least two. I mean, I think one is that in the area of international development, often you're dealing with some quite extreme power asymmetries. So it's often not about how can my data be used to benefit me because I have access to all of the technology through which those benefits can be delivered. But sometimes you may be in situations where people's data is being used in ways which doesn't really come back to them because they don't have the technologies. They're not going to be in a position to be accessing that personalized information or whatever because they don't have the connectivity, they don't have the technology, the hardware to allow that to happen. So I think in situations of quite extreme power asymmetry, we do need to think really hard about that deal that's being struck and how does that deal look different in different parts of the world among different population groups and so on, and how can we be quite imaginative and creative in how we're thinking about the institutions that we might want to create nationally and globally to help to manage these, what are basically some of the age-old questions of power and who benefits. But in this,
of course, we talk a lot about the benefits, and I think our passion is a lot of it is around the common good and public goods and the public sector, but also the session around professional development with AI and how it's going to apply and help support businesses develop their services. What new kinds of literacy we're going to require in the knowledge workers who will be using these tools, in the same way that we went through a period where people became familiar with using spreadsheets and databases and all sorts of other kind of tools that have accelerated their days. They're going to be in possession of tools that are augmented by generative AI. And what kind of critical mindset they'll need to bring to this, what skills they'll need, but also what sense of, is the data that this system's been trained on fully representative of the world I live in? So back again to these long-standing concerns, not new in one sense, ones that we both understand that we really still need to work on, data literacy.
Oh, absolutely. And I think it's that sense of the opportunities which is really galvanizing a lot of the governments that we work with who are, really kind of committed to improving the data sets and making data more available and investing in some of the hardware and the skills. They're really motivated by a sense of the opportunities that do exist for, for whole countries and for people within them, if we can get this right, in the sense that there is a new economic opportunity here. There is maybe a chance to create a pattern of economic growth which is more equal, which is more evenly spread, which benefits, people across a whole spectrum, who've previously been excluded. So I think there is huge optimism, but equally, no lack of clarity about the scale of the investment that is required in all things, in some of the infrastructure, in the skills, which is a huge barrier, and so on. And I think, we really need to think, as we're thinking about these questions of regulation, as we're thinking about all of these different dimensions, we need to apply that lens of global lens. Who is going to benefit, and how can we create some of these institutions so we're not repeating the challenges of earlier periods of development and economic growth?
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? There's this kind of sense, and you referenced it there, that somehow old challenges, and in some sense, the appeal to the quality of data and a really high quality data infrastructure can sound a bit old school to some people. They sort of say, well, yeah, but AI is the future. And we've been saying, our mantra has been today, there is no AI without data, and there's no AI for good without good data. So we will keep on coming back to this, and we've somehow got to re-explain the importance of high quality data infrastructure that needs to be maintained, sustained, invested in. It just doesn't happen for nothing, and it just doesn't happen without having skilled practitioners and people in policy and technology and societal impact understanding it. So perhaps a point to reflect on is this question again of, as we look at the plurality of voices, the range of geographies we've had represented today and different perspectives, even when you're doing business in Global South, for example, there's often a disregard or a failure to understand what the variation in indigenous knowledge is, the particularities of a legislative context or a business context. We really do have to be a slightly broader minded community, do we not, in terms of what even trains these models?
Mm-hmm. We absolutely do. And I think the great thing, as we were saying earlier about the challenges of bringing people together in one place, is the same tools that we have can allow us to do that. We can communicate so much more easily now. It's so much, these things don't need to be a mystery. Any of us can click on a link and speak to anybody around the world. So I think, we do have, again, this opportunity to make a genuine, to create this genuinely global conversation. And I think in doing so, to expose some of the challenges, neglected tropical diseases and other things that have just been kind of very easy to hide because they're sort of located in pockets of the world that few people know about, or, that the incidence is perhaps not very high. But, with the increase in data, with the improvements in technology, we have this opportunity to kind of make visible some of the challenges that have been invisible for a very, very long time.
And that's such an important point. Yeah, such an important point. And we're facing this in a very interesting modern context, this so-called idea of model collapse, where if huge amounts of our content ends up being generated by the AIs themselves, we might lose that diversity, the very thing we're talking about, neglected parts of our data landscape. So I think we're going to see a need to maintain that diversity, not least because unless we can tell the machine generated from the human generated, unless we can have a sense of the long tail of distribution of knowledge, we will have systems, models that are, in some sense, much less interesting and relevant than they could be.
Yeah. No, I think that's so important. I think in some ways the solution to all of these is the same. We've sort of tended almost to kind of assume away some of the challenges of the data itself. It's been a kind of, well, let's just somehow skip over the kind of the actual data that we need to feed these models, that, as you've been saying for a long time, Nigel, is the sort of, what is the word you use, the feedstock for AI. It's the absolute, it's kind of what we absolutely need. It's kind of the, without that, there's no AI. And I think we've almost kind of, perhaps because AI has tended to be developed in places where there's no shortage of data, we've sort of skipped over that challenge and almost kind of pretended it doesn't exist and, oh, that's somebody else's problem. If we want to move AI beyond this kind of phase of experimentation, in the sense, the kind of low-hanging fruit, that is the bit that is really going to stand between us and the ambitions that are now, I think, quite rightly being developed for AI in terms of what it can do for humanity.
Thanks very much. Look, Claire, it's been fabulous to have you with us today. And just the final thought from me, I think, on this is that it's so much about the values that I know we both believe in, the values that look to a public good rather than just simply a private good. And that these things don't have to be antagonistic, but we have to give a balanced weight to things that support the collective good. And we've seen that in everything from the pandemic response. We see it now in situations where we wish to have trusted data that is representative of the whole data ecosystem and of individuals and collectives and organizations, large and small, private and public. So look, have a great conference. I wish you all the best for your Festival of Data in Uruguay, and I'm sure we'll talk again.
Thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure, and yeah, very well done today on what I'm sure was an amazing day for everybody.